Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix Chapter 7 The Ministry of Magic. When the elevator doors opened, 2 internal memos and a few wizards went out, but a few more memos flew in. Because of this, the light above them flickered on and off. 4th floor. Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, including the Beast Division, Being Division, and Spirit Division, previously introduced as a department that assists those who suffer from separation of body and soul due to improper use of apparition. Old Crane, Goblin Liaison Office, and Pest Advisory Board. Here we are, said the wizard holding a fire-breathing chicken, as he and several memos left the elevator. The elevator doors closed again. 3rd floor. Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes, including the Accidental Magic Reversal Squad, Obliviator Headquarters, and Muggle-Worthy Excuse Committee. At this floor, everyone except for Harry, Mr. Weasley, and a wizard reading a long parchment in the elevator got off. When the elevator began to ascend again, the remaining memos continued to circle around the overhead light. Then the elevator doors opened once more, and the female voice announced, 2nd floor, Department of Magical Law Enforcement, including the Improper Use of Magic Office, Aura Headquarters, and the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office. This is it, Harry, Mr. Weasley said as they and the wizard walked out of the elevator, and arrived at a corridor with a row of doors. My office is on the other side of this floor. Mr. Weasley, Harry said as they passed a sunlit window, aren't we still underground? Yes, we are underground, Mr. Weasley said. Those are magical windows. The Magical Maintenance Department decides what the weather is each day. During their last pay raise negotiation, we had 2 months of hurricane weather. Turn this way, Harry. They turned a corner, passed through 2 thick oak doors, and entered a noisy open area divided into cubicles filled with talking and laughter. Internal memos shot around like mini rockets. On the nearest cubicle hung a crooked sign that read, Aura Headquarters. As they passed by, Harry peeked around the doorway, and saw that the walls of the Aura's cubicles were covered with pictures of wanted wizards and their own family photos, as well as posters of their favorite Quidditch teams and articles from the Daily Prophet. A wizard in a bright red robe sat cross-legged on his desk, hastily writing a report with a large quill, with his hair in a ponytail longer than Bill's. Further along, a witch with an eye patch was sitting on top of her cubicle wall, chatting with Kingsley Shacklebolt. Good morning, Weasley, Kingsley greeted cautiously as they approached. Do you have a second? I need to have a word with you. Yes, if it's truly just a second, Mr. Weasley replied. I'm a bit busy right now. They were talking, but it seemed like it was difficult to communicate. When Harry wanted to greet Kingsley, Mr. Weasley stepped on Harry's foot. They followed Kingsley all the way inside to the innermost cubicle. Harry was stunned by the scene before him. In every direction around him were newspaper clippings and old photographs of Sirius Black's face, even photographs from when Sirius was still considered a good guy, like at the Potter wedding, pinned to the walls. The only space not covered in Sirius material was a world map, with red pushpins shining like gems on it. Here, Kingsley said roughly to Mr. Weasley, shoving a bundle of parchment into his hand. I've been gathering as much information as I can on Muggle flying engines over the past 12 months. We've had reports that Black is still using his old motorbike. Kingsley winked at Harry and then quietly added, give him that magazine, he'll find it quite interesting. Then he spoke in a normal tone, don't take too long, Weasley. The delay on that report set our investigation back a month. If you'd read my report, you'd know that thing was a firebolt, Mr. Weasley said coldly, and I'm afraid you'll have to continue waiting for news on the motorbike. We're rather busy at the moment. He lowered his voice, if you can leave before 7, Molly's made meatballs. He led Harry out of Kingsley's cubicle, through a second oak door into another unit, turned left down the next corridor, and then right into a dimly lit, obviously shabby corridor. At the end, they reached a dead end. To their left was a slightly open broom cupboard, and on the right, a dull brass plaque hung on a door that read, "Misuse of Muggle Artifacts Office." Mr. Weasley's shabby office looked even smaller than the broom cupboard opposite. 2 desks were crammed inside, with a row of stuffed cabinets against the wall and just enough space in between for them to squeeze through. Each cabinet top was piled high with stacks of files. In the little space left on the walls were several items that fascinated Mr. Weasley, a few pictures of cars, including a dismantled engine, 2 diagrams of mailboxes, cut out from Muggle children's books, and a diagram showing how to wire a plug. On the desk opposite Mr. Weasley's was a photograph of a drunken wizard hiccuping sadly, fiddling with a pair of empty gloves with his thumbs. Next to the plate was a Weasley family photo. Harry noticed that Percy seemed to have walked out of it. "We don't have windows here," Mr. Weasley said apologetically, taking off his jacket and hanging it on the back of his chair. "We've applied for some. But they don't seem to think we need a window here." "Harry, stop looking, Perkins hasn't arrived yet," said Mr. Weasley, who was quickly scanning the parchment Kingsley had just handed him while Harry squeezed into a chair behind Perkins' desk. "Ha," Mr. Weasley smiled slightly after taking something out of a magazine called the Quibbler Star. "Yes, he's right. I'm sure Sirius will find this amusing. Oh dear, what time is it?" An interdepartmental memo flew in through the open door and landed on the belching drunkard's photo. Mr. Weasley opened the letter and read aloud, "Bissonnel Green reports the 3rd regurgitating public restroom. This is ridiculous. A regurgitating restroom. Anti-Muggle prank," Mr. Weasley said, frowning. "We dealt with 2 last week, one in Wimbledon and another in Elephant and Castle. The Muggles were just about to flush when everything vanished. Yes, you can imagine these things keep happening. I'd say they should call a plumber, you know, the people who fix pipes." "A plumber?" "Exactly, yes. Of course, they'll be embarrassed. Just hope we catch a few of the culprits. The Aurors won't go after them. Oh no, these things are too trivial to involve Aurors. It's under the jurisdiction of the regular Magical Law Enforcement Patrol." "Ah, Harry, this is Perkins." A hunchbacked old wizard who looked a bit shy walked into the room at that moment. He had a graying beard and was panting. "Oh, Arthur," he shouted, not noticing Harry. "Thank God. I didn't know if it was best to wait for you. I just sent an owl to your house, but apparently, you didn't get it. A few minutes ago, an urgent message arrived." "I know, it's about that regurgitating restroom," said Mr. Weasley. "No, it's about Potter's son's hearing. They've changed the time and place. It's happening now, at 8 o'clock, in the old courtroom 10 downstairs." "In courtroom 10 downstairs? But they told me," Merlin's beard. Mr. Weasley looked at his watch, let out a yelp, and jumped up from his chair. "Quick, Harry, we should have been there 5 minutes ago." Perkins pressed himself against the cabinet to let Mr. Weasley run out of the office, with Harry following closely behind. "Why did they change the time?" Harry asked, panting as they rushed through the Aurors' cubicles. People turned their heads to watch them speed by, and Harry felt all his senses were still stuck back at Perkins' desk. "I don't know, but thank goodness we came early. Missing the hearing would be disastrous." Mr. Weasley skidded to a stop in front of an elevator, anxiously pressing the down button. "Come on." The elevator clattered into view, and they quickly ran inside. Each time the elevator stopped, Mr. Weasley cursed and pounded the button for the 9th level. "Those courtrooms haven't been used in years," Mr. Weasley said angrily. "I can't imagine why they would hold the hearing there, unless," but no, just then, a fat witch with a smoking goblet walked into the elevator, but Mr. Weasley didn't look at her closely. "Main hall," the cold female voice announced. The golden grills opened, and Harry caught a distant glimpse of the fountain with golden statues as the fat witch exited, and a sallow-skinned wizard with a sad face entered. "Good morning, Arthur," he said in a funeral-like tone as the elevator began to descend. "Don't often see you down here." "Urgent business, Bode," Mr. Weasley said, anxiously tapping his foot and glancing worriedly at Harry. "Ah, yes," Bode said, studying Harry with unblinking eyes. Of course. Harry had little interest in Bode at that moment, and his unblinking stare wasn't making Harry feel any more comfortable. "Mysteries Department," the cold voice announced as the door opened. "Come on, Harry," Mr. Weasley said as the infuriating elevator doors slid open. They hurried down a corridor that looked completely different from the ones above. The walls were bare, with no windows or doors, except for a black meadow painting at the end. Harry thought they would go through it, but Mr. Weasley grabbed his hand and pulled him to the left, where there was an open staircase. Down here," Mr. Weasley gasped, running 2 steps at a time. "The elevator doesn't go this far down. Why are they doing this here?" They reached the bottom of the stairs and ran along another corridor, this one resembling the dungeons at Hogwarts in its unpleasantness, with rough stone walls and protruding torches. They passed heavy wooden doors with iron bolts and keyholes. "Courtroom 10. I think we're nearly there, yes." Mr. Weasley skidded to a stop in front of a grimy black door with a large lock. He leaned against the wall, exhausted, clutching his chest. "Go on in," he panted, nodding toward the door. "This is it. Aren't you coming in with me?" "No, I'm not allowed in." "Good luck." Harry's heart was pounding in his throat. His mouth was dry, and he swallowed with difficulty as he turned the iron handle and stepped into the courtroom. Harry was panting now. He had to save himself. He had been in similarly terrifying dungeons before. Harry had never seen this place before, but he had visited it in Dumbledore's Pensieve. In this very place, he had watched Lestrange sentenced to life imprisonment in Azkaban. The walls were made of black stone, and the torches gave off a dim light. On either side of him were empty benches, but on the topmost row of benches sat several shadows, all whispering quietly. But when the large doors closed behind Harry with a loud bang, the hall was filled with an ominous silence. A cold voice echoed through the courtroom. "You're late." "Sorry," Harry said nervously, I didn't know the time had changed." "That's not the jury's fault," the voice said. "We sent an owl to your house this morning." "Sit down." Harry looked down carefully at the chair in the middle of the courtroom. The chair had chains hidden in its armrests. He had seen these chains spring to life and bind anyone who sat in the chair. He walked across the stone floor, his footsteps echoing loudly. As Harry cautiously sat on the edge of the chair, the chains rattled menacingly, but did not bind him. Harry felt even more uncomfortable. He looked up at the people seated on the row of benches above him. From what he could see, there were about 50 people sitting there, all wearing plum-colored robes, with a beautifully embroidered silver W on the left side of the chest. They all stared at him from beneath their noses, some with stern expressions and others with curious looks. I in the front row, sitting in the center, was Cornelius Fudge, the Minister for Magic, a very high-ranking official, the top boss himself, Old Crane. Fudge was a stout man who usually wore a grayish-green wizard hat, but he had taken it off today. He also wore a different expression today, one that lacked his usual indulgent smile when speaking to Harry. A witch with a broad, square jaw sat to Fudge's left, wearing a monocle with a stern expression. On Fudge's right was another witch, but she was sitting far back on the bench, so her face was entirely hidden in shadow. "Very well," Fudge said. "The accused is present, albeit arriving last. Let us begin." "Are you ready?" he asked those present. "Yes, sir," a familiar, eager voice said. Ron's brother, Percy, was sitting at the far end of the front row. Harry looked up at Percy, hoping to see some kind of signal from him, but there was no response. Percy's eyes were hidden behind his horn-rimmed glasses, a piece of parchment in front of him, and a large quill in his hand. "The disciplinary hearing of August the 12th, Fudge said in a loud voice, and Percy immediately began taking notes. "To examine offences committed by Harry James Potter, against the decree for the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery, and the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy. The accused currently resides at number 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, in the county of Surrey. Interrogators: Cornelius Oswald Fudge, Minister for Magic; Amelia Susan Bones, Head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement; Dolores Jane Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary to the Minister. Court Scribe: Percy Ignatius Weasley, Defense Counsel; Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore," a calm voice said from behind Harry. Harry quickly turned around, resulting in a crick in his neck. Dumbledore was calmly walking across the room, wearing a deep blue robe, and looking extraordinarily calm. His long silver beard and hair gleamed in the torchlight. Dumbledore stood next to Harry, and looked up at Fudge through his half-moon glasses perched halfway down his long, crooked nose. The members of the jury began whispering among themselves, and all eyes were now on Dumbledore. Some looked distressed, others slightly frightened. 2 older wizards in the back row were waving their hands in greeting. When Harry saw Dumbledore, a powerful emotion surged in his chest, a feeling of hope not unlike hearing a phoenix's song. He wanted to see Dumbledore's eyes, but Dumbledore wasn't looking at him. He was staring intently at the evidently flustered Fudge. "Ah," Fudge said, looking completely flabbergasted. Dumbledore: "Yes, did you, receive our, notice of the change in time and location for the hearing?" "I would have certainly missed the hearing," Dumbledore said cheerfully. "However, thanks to a fortunate mistake, I arrived at the Ministry 3 hours early, so nothing was lost." "Yes, well, I suppose we need another chair, Weasley, could you?" No need, Dumbledore said happily. He pulled out his wand and gave a little wave, and a soft, floral-patterned armchair appeared beside Harry. Dumbledore sat down, his long fingers spread out, observing Fudge through them with an interested expression. The members of the jury were still whispering, looking uneasy and fidgety. They only quieted down when Fudge spoke again. "Yes," Fudge said slowly, flipping through his notes again. "Well then, the charges." "Yes," Fudge said, pulling a parchment from the stack of documents in front of him, taking a deep breath, and beginning to read. "The charges against the accused are as follows: that the accused did knowingly, having received a written warning from the Ministry of Magic for a similar offense, which should have made him fully aware that his actions were illegal, perform a patroness charm in a Muggle-inhabited area, and in the presence of a Muggle on the 2nd of August at 23 minutes past 9 at night. The accused's actions violate paragraph C of the Decree for the Reasonable Restriction of Underage Sorcery, 1875, and also Clause 13 of the International Confederation of Wizards Statute of Secrecy. Are you Harry James Potter of number 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey?" Fudge asked, staring at Harry over the top of the parchment. "Yes," Harry said. "You received an official warning from the Ministry of Magic 3 years ago for performing underage magic, did you not?" "Yes, but you still performed the patroness charm on the night of the 2nd of August, did you not?" "Yes," Harry said, "but you are aware that underage wizards are not allowed to perform magic outside of school, correct?" "Yes, but you knew you were in a Muggle-populated area, correct?" "Yes, but are you fully aware that you were very close to a Muggle at the time?" "Yes," Harry said irritably, "but I used magic, because we were." The witch with the monocle interrupted Harry in a rapid tone. "You performed a full patroness charm, correct?" "Yes," Harry said, "because a corporeal patroness, correct?" What?" Harry said. "Was your patroness clearly formed? I mean, it wasn't just mist or smoke, correct?" "Yes," Harry said, now feeling impatient and slightly frustrated. It was a stag. It's always a stag. Always? Madam Bones asked loudly. You've performed the patroness charm before. Yes, Harry said. I've been able to cast it for over a year now. So you were 15 at the time? Yes, Anne, you learned this at school. Professor Lupin taught me in my 3rd year because of the impressive, Madam Bones said, staring down at Harry. To perform a true patroness at that age, very impressive. Some of the wizards and witches around her began whispering again. Some nodded, but others frowned and shook their heads. This is not about how impressive the magic is, Fudge asked irritably. In fact, the more impressive, the worse it is. I believe the child's magic was clearly seen by a muggle. Those wizards who had been frowning earlier now muttered in agreement, while Percy's sanctimonious nodding irritated Harry into speaking. I used magic because of the Dementors, Harry said loudly before anyone could interrupt. He had expected more commotion, but the courtroom fell into an even deeper silence than before. Dementors? Madam Bones asked after a moment, her thick eyebrows rising so high that her monocle nearly fell out. What do you mean, child? I mean 2 Dementors appeared out of nowhere and attacked me and my cousin. Ah, Fudge said again, with a displeased smirk, glancing around at the members of the jury as if expecting them to share the joke. Yes, we've heard that one before. Dementors in Little Whinging? Madam Bones asked in a puzzled tone. I don't understand, you don't understand, Amelia. Fudge was still smirking. Let me explain. He's clearly thought this through and decided to use Dementors as a cover for his little story. Muggles can't see Dementors, can they, boy? Convenient, very convenient. So it's just your word against. I'm not lying. Harry's loud voice drowned out another surge of whispering in the courtroom. There were 2 of them. They came from both ends of the alley, and it got all dark and cold, and my cousin felt them too and ran off. Enough. Enough. Fudge said dismissively, with a smug expression. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm sure this is just a prearranged story. Dumbledore cleared his throat, and the courtroom fell silent again. Actually, we have a witness who saw the Dementors in the alley, he said. Besides Dudley Dursley. Fudge's round face deflated as if the air had been let out of him. He stared at Dumbledore for a moment, then seemed to snap back to reality. I'm afraid we don't have time for more lies. I will quickly. I might be mistaken, Dumbledore said cheerfully, but I believe the Wizengamot Charter is quite clear that the accused has the right to present witnesses in their defense. Is that not the policy of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Madam Bones? He pointed at the monocle-wearing witch. Correct, Madam Bones said. Very correct. Oh, very well, Fudge said suddenly. Where is this person? I've brought her with me, Dumbledore said. She's just outside the door. May I? No, Weasley, you go, Fudge barked at Percy. Bring her in at once. Percy left the courtroom, quickly passing through the stone steps without looking at Harry or Dumbledore. He soon returned, followed by Mrs. Figg, who looked nervous and even more eccentric than usual. Harry hoped she hadn't forgotten to change out of her men's slippers. Dumbledore stood up and offered his chair to Mrs. Figg, then conjured another one for himself. Full name? Fudge asked loudly as Mrs. Figg sat at the very edge of the chair, extremely nervous. Arabella Doreen Figg, Mrs. Figg said in a trembling voice. Your precise identity? Fudge asked in a bored, haughty tone. I'm a resident of Little Whinging, near where Mr. Harry Potter lives, Mrs. Figg replied. No other wizards or witches are registered as living in Little Whinging besides Mr. Harry Potter, Madam Bones immediately said. That location is too close to the surveillance of past events. I'm a squib, Mrs. Figg said. So I'm not registered, am I? A squib, eh? Fudge said, leaning closer to Mrs. Fig to examine her. "We'll investigate you. Provide your detailed background information to my assistant, Weasley. By the way, can Squibs see Dementors?" he added, glancing around. "Yes, we can," Mrs. Fig said angrily. Old Arabella now thought Fudge was absolutely detestable. This was clearly a deliberate attempt to fabricate a wrongful conviction. Fortunately, we had Dumbledore to take charge of the situation, otherwise, we might not have had the chance to watch Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. "That was close," said Old Crane. Fudge looked down at Mrs. Fig, his eyebrows raised. "Very well," he said coldly. "What is your story?" "I went out around 9 o'clock on the evening of August 2nd to buy cat food from the store at the corner of Wisteria Walk," Mrs. Fig began hastily, as if she had memorized what to say. "But then I heard a commotion coming from the alley between Magnolia Crescent and Wisteria Walk. As I approached the alley, I saw Dementors running. Madam Bones said sharply. "Dementors don't run, they glide." "That's what I meant to say," Mrs. Fig quickly corrected herself, a pink tinge appearing on her gaunt face. "They were gliding along the alley, they looked like two kids." "You said they looked like what?" Madam Bones' eyebrows furrowed so deeply that her monocle fell off her face. "Yes, one was very fat, and the other was very skinny." No, Madam Bones said impatiently. "Dementors, describe the Dementors." "Oh," Mrs. Fig's blush now spread to her neck. "They were large, huge, and cloaked." Harry felt a horrible sinking feeling in his stomach at that moment. Whatever Mrs. Fig said, it seemed to Harry that at most, she had only ever seen pictures of Dementors, and those pictures did not convey their true nature, their terrifying movement, hovering a few inches above the ground, or their rotting smell, or the dreadful rattling noise they made as they sucked in the surrounding air. In the second row, a short, stout wizard was whispering sideways to his neighbor, a witch with curly hair who nodded and giggled. She was tall and cloaked. When Fudge snorted mockingly, Madam Bones repeated coldly, "I understand. Is there anything else?" "Yes," Mrs. Fig said. "I felt everything around them turn cold, reminding you it was a very hot summer evening, and I felt as if all the happiness in the world had vanished, and I recalled terrifying things." Mrs. Fig's voice was trembling and dull. Madam Bones' eyes widened slightly. Harry could see a blush appearing on the spot under her eyebrow where her monocle had pressed against her face. "What were the Dementors doing at that time?" Madam Bones asked, giving Harry a renewed glimmer of hope. "They were heading straight for those two children." Mrs. Fig's voice now grew louder and more confident, the pink color returning to her face. "One of the children fell, and the other was slowly retreating, doing his best to ward off the Dementors. That child was Harry. He tried to cast a spell twice, but only produced a wisp of silver mist. On his third attempt, he finally cast a full Patronus charm. This spell drove away the first Dementor, and then, with Harry's effort, the spell drove the second Dementor away from his cousin. And that is what happened." After finishing her somewhat incomplete statement, Mrs. Fig ended her account. Madam Bones stared silently at Mrs. Fig, while Fudge did not look at her at all, but was restlessly flipping through his papers. Finally, Fudge opened his mouth and, with a highly aggressive tone, said, "Is that all you have to say?" "That's all that happened," Mrs. Fig repeated. "Very well," Fudge said. "You may leave." Mrs. Fig cast a frightened glance at Fudge and Dumbledore, then stood up and slowly walked towards the door. Harry heard the door slam shut behind her. "She's not a very credible witness," Fudge said arrogantly. "No, I'm not sure about that," Madam Bones quickly said. "She described very accurately the effects of a Dementor attack. I can't imagine why she would say such things if Dementors hadn't appeared in Little Whinging. But Dementors wandering in a Muggle residential area, and encountering a passing wizard." Fudge scoffed contemptuously. The odds of that happening are very, very small. Even a betting man wouldn't wager on it. Oh, I don't think any of us here believe the Dementors just happened to be there, Dumbledore said softly. The witch sitting on Fudge's left, whose face was hidden in the shadows, shifted uncomfortably, but the others still sat quietly and motionless in their seats. What is that supposed to suggest? Fudge asked coldly. That means, I think, that Dementors were ordered to go there, Dumbledore said. I think we have records to check whether any Dementors were ordered to patrol Little Whinging. Fudge roared. These days, there's no excluding the possibility that Dementors take orders from sources other than the Ministry of Magic, Dumbledore said calmly. I've already given you my opinion on this matter, Cornelius. Yes, you have, Fudge said aggressively, but I have no reason to believe your view has any credibility. The Dementors are currently stationed in Azkaban, the wizard prison, faithfully following all our commands. Then, Dumbledore said calmly and clearly, we must ask ourselves why someone in the Ministry of Magic would have ordered Dementors to that alleyway on August 2nd. After hearing these words, the courtroom fell silent. The witch on Fudge's right leaned forward, and for the first time, Harry could see her clearly. He thought she looked like a pale, giant toad. She was almost crouching in her seat. This witch had a wide, slack face, a thick, short neck like Uncle Vernon's, and a wide, vacuous mouth. Her eyes were large, round, and bulging, and even her curly short hair had a black velvet bow perched on it. It gave Harry the feeling that she was like a large fly about to be caught by her sticky, long tongue. This was Dolores Jane Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary to the Minister of Magic, Fudge said. The witch spoke in a high-pitched, affectedly girlish voice that sent shivers down Harry's spine. It reminded him of the croak of a toad. I'm sure I didn't quite understand what you were saying, Professor Dumbledore, she giggled foolishly, though her large, round eyes remained as cold as ever. Silly me, but it sounded like you were suggesting that the Ministry ordered this child to be attacked. She let out a tinkling laugh that made Harry's hair stand on end. A few other members of the jury chuckled along with her, but none of them were truly laughing. If Dementors now can only receive orders from the Ministry, and 2 Dementors really did attack Harry and his cousin a week ago, then the logical conclusion is that someone in the Ministry ordered this attack, Dumbledore said politely. Of course, it's also possible that these rogue Dementors were acting outside of the Ministry's control. There are no Dementors outside of the Ministry's control. Fudge shouted, his face turning a liverish color. This is purely something I personally believe is very well done, so I made this video for everyone. The main purpose is to allow blind or visually impaired people to watch TV and movies, providing an inclusive experience for those with disabilities, so they can access the same information and entertainment as others. I appreciate you watching this video. If you liked it, please support this series. Your views are my motivation, so don't forget to subscribe to this channel, click the little bell next to it, and give me a thumbs up.